Dhamma.
Yeah.
Um, Generally, there are two ways to get started with a student. One is to jump right into meditation, and the other one is to give kind of an overview about what's really happening in the whole thing, so that with that overview, and we've already begun to do some of both with you, partly because you started with meditation. You already had a lot of experience with meditation, so I wanted to make sure that you were grounded well in that. But unless you've got some questions about all of that, I'd like to change topics for today.
Okay.
Okay? All right. Um, Basically, the way to get started is kind of a surprise by talking about it this way, that there are actually two different Buddhisms, and that one is the really, really big one, and the other one is the small one, and the small one kind of hides out inside of the big one. And so the big one would be the Buddhist religion, that which is known and well understood by everyone who would want to be or willing to wear the label of Buddhism. And right now, that kind of Buddhism is getting labeled as Western Buddhism, but it's still just the Buddhist religion. However, that Buddhist religion is founded upon the actual teachings of the Buddha. And so sometimes we have to kind of extract out, or let us say that when we in fact have done that and can present the actual teachings of the Buddha and the Buddhist religion, we can see, oh, well, all of that is the same, but all of that is different, or that it winds up with a belief system. You could, and so one of the ways of talking about it is that one of them is the religion, the other one is the noble Dhamma that actually works. Now, here's the thing that makes it complicated. Everybody who comes to Buddhism generally comes from or through some sort of religion or magical belief system or a set of beliefs from some other religion or whatever like that. And so we bring a whole lot of baggage. And imagine it's like that we bring a lot of baggage, and that we kind of drop that baggage at the door to the Buddhist temple before we go inside. And now imagine 2,500 years of baggage being left at the door. And all of that baggage then is the Buddhist religion. It is not what the Buddha taught, it's what everybody who came to Buddhism thought it was until they really began to understand the deeper nature of the teaching. Now, there is one point that is the tipping point. Now, for the noble path, this tipping point is actually the very first step onto the noble path. There's a bit of preparation. Two knowledges have to precede that, and both of those knowledges have to do with meditation, and I'll catch that up. But this third knowledge that you come across is the knowledge of, basically the one word is anatta or atta. Now, the Buddha actually, his original teaching was, let us say, easily seen by many, many millions nowadays, and also in that time, was to be a rebuke or an argument or a rebellion against the religions of the time. And the religions of the time of the Buddha have been at war with Buddhism ever since. And in some cases, they downright won. Okay, and they won in one of two ways. One way that they won was by let us say, getting to know your enemy very well, so that they understood Buddhism, so that they could kind of pull it apart from the inside. And this happened most strongly in about the 5th century AD. And so in Burma and in Sri Lanka, most of the Buddhist monks there love the literature that comes from that time, which is normally called the commentaries, and another work called the Visuddhimagga, and also other works called the Abhidhamma, which is not really part of the issue. The real issue is the commentaries and the Visuddhimagga, because that's the time period when the real teachings of the Buddha was turned back into a religion by introducing the concept of rebirth. Because reincarnation is what the Hindus believed, but the word birth can be used in different ways in the English language, and I imagine whatever the Chinese word for birth is, you can use that in several different ways. An example of that would be the birth of the blues, or that you put a ship into a berth. Where you park or dock the boat is called a berth. It's also called a bay. Also, where sailors sleep, in the hammock or the rack that they sleep in, is also known as a berth. So the word in this regard kind of means the word a compartment or the beginning of something new. Now, in the time of the Buddha, the word jati meant physical birth, but it also meant all kinds of birth. And that the Buddha used it in the sense of whenever a new thought comes up, that's the birth of a thought. Whenever ideas of the self come up, that's the rebirth of the self. Over and over and over again, sometimes 10, 20, 100, 1,000 times a day. And so this is what the real teaching of rebirth was from the concept of the Buddha, but that the those who were believing in reincarnation sought to change that quality of birth being something happening over and over and over again, the start of something new. Here it comes again, a wheel of samsara, over and over and over again. They take it and put it into a lifetime, so that when we get into it with the Paticca that topic is talked about a lot extensively in the Visuddhimagga in the sense of 3 births. The last birth that we had, the current life that we have, and the future life that we will have. However, the Visuddhimagga's interpretation of the word birth is completely wrong here, because it in fact is the past, but it's the immediate past giving rise to the immediate present moment, which then will rot into the immediate future. That's the way that it is to be understood, everything in the concept of here now, to where religions gain, let us say, a viewpoint that is millennia. They look at it from the long, long distance. After I die, I will get some benefit. That this is, in fact, part of the law of karma. So, the way that I want to teach is to make sure that the students understand that the value of the teachings of the Buddha is something that can be had right here, right now, in this present moment. That's where the benefit lies. Not even in, after you get some skills developed, then 3 years from now you'll be happy. Oh no, 3 years is too long. No, we can be happy right now. All we have to do is to remember. So that's one of the most important qualities to it. Now, one of the qualities of the belief in reincarnation was, okay, what is it that gets reincarnated? A soul or something. And in fact, within the Hindu tradition, it's generally, they think of it as consciousness that's being reborn. Now, within Christianity, I'm not sure what they have. I know a little bit about Chinese culture, and I also know that it's been tremendously disrupted starting about 50 years ago. But somewhere back in the past, they had the idea of the jumping ghost.
Yeah.
Okay. So that gives an idea that the soul somehow is connected or related to the body. To where with Hindus, they burn up the body because the body's not important after it's dead. What's important to them is this ghostly thing that they actually refer to as consciousness. In fact, I spent quite a lot of time one year, I think it was 1982 or so, in Varanasi, India, where they have the burning huts, where so many, especially the rich people from all over India, they want to have their bodies burned at the burning huts in Varanasi, and then have their ashes dumped in the holy river while all of these monks are chanting and everything. All right? So here I am down there. In fact, in those days, they were allowed a camera. Now I hear that no cameras are allowed down in that area. But I don't have any in the photos. But what I remember is that first off, the funeral pyres themselves were quite small, and they were lined up one after another with the space between, so that the Brahmin priest and attendants could go back and forth between them. But it was a big long line down the ocean, or down the riverfront. So, without going into too much detail, these funeral pyres were small, so they would have to actually break up the bones and break the kneecaps so that they could fold the legs over on, so that it would get consumed with the fire. Now, at some point along there, the bodies who were being burned, the skull would begin to roast, and therefore there was a lot of mucus would start to boil out of the nose. And this was a sign then that it was time to do the right ceremonies and everything like that. And so the other attendants from several funeral pyres around would all come, and they would have a big stick that was actually a root or a briar. In some countries they call it a shillelagh, but in any case, it was a big piece of long stick of wood that had a wooden knurl at the end of it. They, I think, have been using this thing for centuries, and with great ceremony and everybody chanting while the brain was boiling and bubbling, they'd take it and whack it with this shillelagh, and they'd break it open, and when that happened, great steam, brain parts, all kinds of stuff would spew out because it was under great pressure because of the boiling. And this was what they were talking about, was the release of the soul into the atmosphere. Well, now, that was possibly easy to be believed 2,500 years ago or even 100 years ago. But nowadays we know how steam is made, and we know what's in the brain. So we're not going to easily believe those ceremonies that they have. But this is what they do down there at the burning hats, because people believe that they will have a better life because their body has gone through possibly an expensive ritual that dates back literally 3,000 years. I think they've been doing that there. So the reason I tell you this story is because we're looking at something. What is it that's being reborn? Is it a hopping ghost? Is it a zombie? What do they have in Christian heaven? Are the people see-through? Are they ghostly shaped? Do they have full bodies? Do they have eyes and ears and senses and that kind of stuff? Because that's part of the belief system. Here's an interesting part of it is that in fact with Muslim religion, they are so tied to the body that they think that a body has to have all of its parts when it's in heaven in order to get the benefit of heaven. Therefore, if they have a war or enemies or whatever, they'll be sure to behead or cut up the body parts and hide them away so that the body cannot be recollected together in the grave so that it'll go to heaven. But let's go back to the Hindu one. The Hindu one has to do about what is consciousness, because that's what they think is being reborn. And if you look at a ghostly kind of figure in heaven or whatever, we understand this to kind of be a ghost, but that there is something there that is identifiable. And yet modern physics, we know, elementary particle physics, that anything that gets broken down is going to go down to some nature part such that it cannot be easily identified. An example of that is DNA. If I stay in the ground long enough, a worm's going to be eating my DNA, and then my DNA is a worm's DNA, and how's the poor common machine going to figure out who's who? Especially when you have a big explosion, a lot of people die, a bus goes off a cliff, something like that, and you've got tons and tons of dead bodies and tons of souls to figure out and identify and put in this sort of cosmic comma computer in the sky to try to keep track of all of that stuff. This is what the religions teach us. But the Buddha was saying, oh no, everything is much more immediate. There is in fact cause and effect that's happening every minute. And because of that, consciousness itself is dependently arisen. This is an important point. Consciousness is dependently arisen, and consciousness depends upon a sense organ. The senses, eyes, ears, tongue, body, smell, etc., like that. And that the contact with an object for the eyes and the eyes open, that's what gives consciousness. And that consciousness, in fact, in English, we call it seeing. That I can see that tree, or I can see that plant, or I can see the computer. That's how the mind works, except that when I say I see the plant, it's not actually the word plant that I see. That the word plant is actually a perception that's based upon the fact that I know what plants look like, categorized it, and I say it's a plant. Or in fact, if I go up close, it actually may be a piece of plastic instead, just made to look like a plant, not a plant. Depends. So it has to do then with perception. So let's get back before perception, back to the point of consciousness. Now, consciousness, the Buddha says, is like fire. That means that we know a fire by the name of the fuel of the fire. For instance, a brush fire, or a grass fire, or a gas fire, or a house fire, or a car fire, or an electronics fire. All of these fires are known by the fuel. And so consciousness should also be known by its fuel in the sense of the external object that reaches the eye. So the eye has some fuel on the outside, and the eating of that fuel then becomes sight. Now, both in Pali and in English, we have two different kinds of consciousness. This is kind of important. This is one reason why so many students get confused, because they don't know what consciousness is. In fact, there's two different kinds. So let me explain it to you in a very easy way with the word sight. The first sight is the actual eye and the actual object that come into contact, and that calls sight. That's the consciousness. and then I perceive it. I look through my memory base, and I come up and I recognize it and put it into a classification so that now I understand. I've taken the tree on the outside and made it something on the inside of the mind. And we use that kind of language in the sense of, I see what you mean, or now I see, okay? That's because we've internalized it. We brought it inside. So these are the two kinds of consciousness. The first kind of consciousness is real, and it needs to be paid close attention to. The more, in fact, we investigate, the more we investigate the here now means that we're working through our senses. And one of the bodily senses is actually feeling. One of the mental senses is actually feeling. And so the more here now we are, the more we'll understand what's going on both on the inside and on the outside. But if we take an object, look at it, and then try to figure out what it is, and then make an internal representation of it, by then, perhaps a whole lot of stuff has happened on the outside that we've missed. So, not only that, but that object that's on the inside of the mind, the internal consciousness, is what we react to, not what's actually on the outside. We have to take what's on the outside, make it into consciousness, process it using our memory banks to come up with an internal representation of it, and then that internal representation hits us, impacts us, and that's where feelings come from. There's no self in there anywhere. It's all just process. And when we go far enough into the Dhamma, we begin to see that. And we also come to understand that the very first fetter that we have to get over is the thought that there is a real me that exists for a long time. I don't remember what it was like before I was born, but everybody tells me it was there when I was born. I don't know what it's going to be like in 5 years, never mind what it's going to be like when I die, but people have told me that it's going to be on and on and on. As long as we have that kind of belief system and bring that to our meditation, no progress. No progress. Here's of Buddha. How can I
Sorry,
do
I just lost you. Sorry, I just lost you. But I think I can hear you now. But maybe the last two